Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. It's been a few weeks since we've had an episode, but I do hope all of our video and audio content from the past few weeks, whether it's been our year in review series, Steve and I reacting to some of the portal additions and portal news, as well as our stories about and videos about the Pinstripe Bowl, have helped kind of buy the time until we've had a new episode. So I appreciate y'all's patience and y'all tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We'll get right into it. I kind of want to touch on some of the commits we haven't necessarily talked about on this platform. Nebraska's obviously been busy in the transfer portal, made some new additions. Got Hartley Gilmore from Kentucky, a third wide receiver through the transfer portal. That one came as a bit of a surprise, just in the sense that when he entered the portal, it made some sense that Nebraska would at least test the waters, given the relationship he had with Dikell Shorts. But I wasn't sure if Nebraska was going to be in a space to add a third receiver through the portal, just given where the depth was in the room currently with some of the high school additions as well. But then you saw Jalen Lloyd enter the transfer portal, and shortly after, Gilmore committed. And I think both of those decisions kind of play off of each other a little bit. Gilmore is a guy that has that deep threat ability, can kind of create downfield. His average depth of target back in this past season was over 25 yards. So that tells you kind of what type of routes he's running and what he's best at right now. He's a guy this coaching staff is really high on. He's a guy Dikell Shorts really wanted to join with him, and a guy that Kentucky wanted back really bad. The fact that Nebraska was even able to get him is a big deal considering it's a head-to-head win over a SEC program in Kentucky that has flexed their NIL muscle a little bit on the trail. Kind of tells you the relationship he has with Shorts. Kind of tells you where Nebraska is right now in terms of how aggressive they are in addressing priority positions. Gilmore's a guy that has some growth that still needs to be done, in my opinion. I think he can afford to put on a couple more pounds, but you look at the traits and the combination of traits. This is a guy that can separate downfield, runs really precise routes, is a lot more nuanced as a route runner than you'd expect for relative to his experience. Considering he played relatively lower level football in Florida, didn't go to the camps and didn't go play 7-on-7 like some of these other guys did. So, all things considered, he's a little further ahead as a route runner than you'd expect. Does a good job in and out of breaks, separates pretty naturally, has some really good footwork, really good releases off the line, like has a good combination of release packages. I think he's a guy that's going to come in and improve this room pretty immediately, and he's a guy that at least year one, I kind of see as like a reserve type, like coming off the bench. Behind a Ja'Cory Barney or behind a Dane Key, or behind an Isaiah Hunter. But, he's also a guy that could very much contend for playing time and very much jump a few people on the depth chart just because, again, that's the level of ceiling he's got. That's the type of talent he has. He's an addition that's not necessarily for the 2025 season, but for 2026 and beyond. Dane Key is a guy that's 2025 and that's it. It's an important year for him. But you look around, Isaiah Hunter's a guy that's going to be in that room for a good bit if he does stick around at Nebraska. Hartley Gilmore's one that's going to stick around. Ja'Cory Barney, same thing. Three guys right there. That's kind of the future of the room. Plus, you add in Cortez Mills from the high school ranks, Isaiah Mosey from the high school ranks, Quinn Clark and Carter Nelson as they continue to develop. Obviously, another big development over the last week is Carter Nelson going down for hip surgery. That's a tough one, and he misses a spring, a spring that would have been kind of critical for him in terms of earning some playing time and getting comfortable on the field. I think he's going to spend this time now gaining some weight. The hope is he's back for the summer and back for fall camp, full strength. But it's a hip injury, and those things are never easy. If that's the best way to kind of put it. Those things aren't one for one. And not every hip injury and recovery looks the same. So really intrigued to kind of follow that storyline through this offseason and see what happens there because Nelson has all the potential in the world, but it has to come together for him. And the best thing for him at this point would have been reps, and he's going to miss out on a spring full of reps. So we'll see what happens there. I think it makes the addition of Gilmore all the more notable and all the more necessary. I think that was something Nebraska kind of needed to do at this point to address kind of the depth in the wide receiver room and add some talent that if all goes well, can be a high-end contributor in the room, can take the top off of defenses, and is a pretty reliable catcher as well. You like the shape of the wide receiver room at this point. I don't expect any more additions through the transfer portal at that position. Unless something pops up that really makes some sense, a kind of unique uh, hybrid of some sort that makes some sense. I don't really see Nebraska in that market anymore. You look around at the rest of the transfer portal. I mean, obviously, a couple other additions to touch on real quick. Marquise goes Trent. From Georgia Southern. Obviously, that's a big one. Marquise Watson Trent, sorry. A lot of Marquises. But Watson Trent from Georgia Southern, committed to Nebraska over the weekend. That's another big addition, just in the sense that you needed someone to replace Mekhi Bear. You needed a veteran in the linebacker room. You needed someone for Vincent Shavers to learn from. And when you watch Marcus Watson Trent, you go back and watch what he did at Georgia Southern over the past few seasons. You see a lot of Vincent Shavers there. Vincent, in my opinion, Shavers has a little more athletic upside long term. But both similar size, right around 5'11", 6 foot flat, generous 6 foot, 220 pounds. Kind of play with their hair on fire, kind of attack like a missile. As tacklers. Both those guys can cover and hold their own in zone. Again, when I say more athletic upside, I trust Shavers a little more in one-on-one man coverage on running backs, tight ends, and receivers than I do Watson Trent at this point. And that's no disrespect to Trent. It's just kind of where Shavers is athletically and where Watson is. That's not what Watson's going to be asked to do. If you're looking at roles and moving forward, Shavers is a guy you can kind of drop into coverage a little bit. Can have him blitz off the line as well. Watson Trent, that's a run defender first, pass rusher second. I expect both of those guys to kind of occupy the inside linebacker spots, with Deshaun McCullough kind of coming off of the jack spot right now. Where Deshaun's ultimately going to play, I think is going to be decided this spring. I think he's a guy that can play jack. I think he could play some high overhang safety, just as that rover type, potentially even a strong safety, or he could play inside linebacker. You can play him a couple different spots. So I'm curious to see if Nebraska utilizes his versatility and lines him up in a couple of different spots, or they maximize him at one specific position and allow him to key in on one, which I think is better for his long-term development, considering how his college career has gone across multiple programs at this point. So I'm that room, is starting to take some shape. I think you're starting to see, a semblance of, okay, what this is going to look like in the future. Vincent Shavers, after his breakout performance in the Pinstripe Bowl, going to be occupying one of those starting linebacker spots, in my opinion. I think Watson Trent is well positioned to occupy another one of those inside linebacker spots. And then right now, I think those outside linebackers are going to be Willis McGahee and Deshaun McCullough. There's a couple others in that mix. We see Nebraska add another true outside linebacker, a true pass rushing edge? I think so. I think that's very much in the cards if they can find the right fit. I think they're going to do their due diligence with, Jayshon Ross, a guy from Alabama, Kansas City native. I think they're going to do their due diligence in the portal and see if there's someone that makes sense. But I think they're looking for length at this point. I don't think, if you look at their strategy, they look at what they've acquired so far, I don't think a sawed-off edge rusher is what they're looking for right now. You're not going to see a 6'2", 250, 260-pound edge rusher joining the program, in my opinion. I think it's got to be someone that's 6'3", 6'4 plus, has some length to them, has some bend to them, can kind of hold their own off the edge, but can also drop back into coverage, has that versatility to kind of to do a little bit of everything. So that's, I think, what's left for them in the portal. And obviously the latest addition for them was Jamir Conn, the defensive back out of Southern Illinois, played for Jamar Mosey at Lee Summit North back in the day, back in 2022, and spent the past year or so at Southern Illinois. Was initially committed to James Madison and said flipped to Nebraska. Conn's a guy that I thought this was an interesting addition as well, and you kind of seeing a strategy start to emerge for Nebraska in the portal, specifically the defensive side of the ball. They're looking for high-end contributors, but they're also looking for guys that can give them multiple years, and guys that, okay, hey, the ceiling is not going to be met in 2025. The ceiling is for 2026 and beyond. For a guy like Conn, for example, probably needs to put on a little more weight to translate from, Southern Illinois up to Big Ten football. Probably needs to put on a little weight. But you like the frame, you like the general trajectory of his frame, and what he could potentially add to that frame. And you like the tape. It's a lot of kind of relying on athleticism to win over uh, traits or over what's the word I'm looking for? Over instincts, essentially instincts and technique. You're seeing athleticism win more, and that you see that often. When you're evaluating high school prospects or lower level transfer prospects as well. Oftentimes, it's really good athletes that just don't have the technique down 100%. And so Conn does a few things well in the technique. He does a really good job shadowing, does a really good job sticking on the inside hip and getting back into phase. But those are things he does because of the level of athlete he is. He's able to get back into phase if he's caught off guard off the line of scrimmage. And you see when talking technique, there are times where he can get pushed off and lose his spot, right off the line of scrimmage and have to recover in a way, and he has the athleticism to recover. But the fact he's getting lost off the line in the first place, or getting caught initially out of position right off the line of scrimmage. That's just a technique thing that needs to get worked on. And you kind of trust that, John Butler and Addison Williams, the new defensive backs coach, can get that through to him this offseason. I think is an intriguing ad just because we said it all year. Nebraska needed to get more athletic in the secondary, and they've done that. The addition of Justin Rhett, the addition of Jamir Conn, the addition of Andrew Marshall. Those guys are, at worst, in my opinion, on par with the best athletes in the room, if not completely athletic upgrades on most of that room. So you're liking the depth that's starting to form in the secondary. I think that's a battle. Obviously, on one side you've got Sierra, right? That's pretty much locked down a starting spot for the foreseeable future. You're expecting Marquez Buford to man one of the safety spots. There's going to be a cornerback two competition opposite Sierra, right? I expect Bly Hill, Jeremiah Charles, Andrew Marshall, those kind of guys, Jamir Conn, to compete for that role. Then there's two other safety spots that need to get worked out. The Deshaun Singleton spot and Isaac Gifford spot. Malcolm Hartzog's going to be in the mix somewhere. I think he's a veteran that's done a lot of good things here. And so I think Nebraska's going to find a way to get him on the field, even if it's not maybe in as big of a role as it was last year. I think they kind of understand some of the limitations with Hartzog's frame at this point in the Big Ten. He's a talented player that can do some things, but ultimately he's been kind of limited by frame primarily to this point. So how that room continues to evolve is going to be a big storyline to watch as we delve into the spring. We could still see Nebraska add in the secondary. They had Marquise Gross-Killebrew. That's where I got the names a little confused, but Marquise Gross-Killebrew, Arizona transfer corner on campus this weekend. Is he a potential add, or are they kind of moving off of him with the addition of Jamir Conn? Could we see another true safety added to the room? I think it would be helpful for Nebraska to potentially add another veteran safety. Justin Rhett was their safety add, the true safety add through the portal, but Rhett's not played a whole lot at Georgia, and he's a guy that needs a little time for it to come together, and so it's kind of a gamble. Taking him is a bit of a gamble in the sense that very, very good athlete, but it has to come together for him athletically. There's no guarantee at this point that it will. So again, some things to watch in the spring. I think Nebraska, on honesty, at this point, is kind of sitting back and waiting to see what they have in the spring, and if they really need to go and address the position, they'll go and address position, or they'll sit with what they have. But you have to be picky at this point with the roster cutdowns coming. And with what's left out there, and on that note, kind of switching gears, we're talking about the portal. Nebraska has work to do. Nebraska has to address the offensive line. You look at the transfer portal right now, what's left for them to touch. They've addressed the secondary. They've done their due diligence there. They've added three members to the secondary. They've added linebackers to the linebacker room. They've added to the defensive line, and you could potentially take one or two more if you can find a true defensive tackle that's 290 plus pounds that makes some sense. They're still waiting a few decisions as well on that front. Wide receivers pretty taken care of. If you can find a reserve running back, I think you take one. But at this point, I don't know if there's one in the portal right now that makes sense for them. But yeah, you look at remaining needs. Offensive line is a big glaring need. They'd like to add a veteran on the interior. They'd like to add a true offensive tackle. One that's emerging for Nebraska right now is Alabama's Elijah Pritchett, who entered the transfer portal a few days ago, and Nebraska's quickly emerged as a school to watch there. That kind of developed right after Fa'alili Fa'amo committed to Wake Forest. That was a big Nebraska target. He ultimately just decided to follow the Washington State staff. If you're a reader at the Insiders Board and you read it at InsideNebraska.com, you kind of got some backstory and some context there. The quick gist of it essentially is, there's a lot of trust there. And Famo is a relationship guy. Nebraska did their best in establishing that relationship. But it's tough to overcome a relationship that has multiple years, like his relationship with Dickert it has is at this point. Dickert helped recruit him obviously, and had him on campus at Washington State, and was a key reason that he made the transition. If you know Fahamo's backstory, he came to campus as a to Washington's campus as a quarterback from America Samoa. That was expected to play edge rusher for them. Was dealing with a knee injury, and so he just stayed put and gained some weight in year one. And then, in year two, they kind of had the conversation with him about playing offensive line, and he wasn't open to it at first. And it was Dickert and the staff that was able to kind of convince him that this is the right move for his career. And we're seeing where it gets him. He's one of the top offensive tackles in the transfer portal. Now gets to go to Wake Forest and play his senior season and potentially earn a top 3 round draft grade. That's kind of where people see that kind of jump he could make. And so there's a lot of trust there just because Dickert was the one that saw the vision and helped him make that transition. So it's tough for Nebraska to beat that. It's tough for Nebraska to overcome those type of relationships. This wasn't an NIL thing. This wasn't a money thing. It was purely just a relationship thing. But Nebraska did, their part and was aggressive there. Ultimately fell short, and that's been the case a couple of times. Whether they like it or not, and whatever the case may be, they have fallen short a couple of times with offensive tackle targets in the transfer portal, and that's something that ultimately falls on Donovan Raiola and the offensive staff. So, they have to move quickly here if they want to land Pritchett, who's not a clean prospect by any means. A guy that started games at Alabama, but led up over 30 pressures this past season. Has had some struggles over the past few seasons, and isn't a clean evaluation. So no, again, not a guaranteed starter by any means either, but a proven body, a proven guy that's held up, that's played in the SEC, that has taken on some of the best pass rushers in the country, and for the most part has held his own. Obviously, been gotten beat a few times, but you the hope at Nebraska, if they were to take him and were to add him, is that hey, it comes together for him being taught by Donovan Raiola, and we have seen offensive linemen like Bryce Bennett, like Turner Corcoran, like Ben Scott, and so on and so forth develop under Donovan Raiola. So the hope is, with spring with Raiola, is able to get him kind of settled and help his footwork and help some of the things that he kind of struggles at right now. A big reason why he's let up, as many pressures as he has, is partly just because the technique isn't all the way there right now. So, if Nebraska is able to land him and able to get through to him, all the better for them, because that is, at the end of the day, he came out of high school as one of the top offensive tackles in the country with a big athletic ceiling. It just, it hasn't come together for him just yet, technique wise. So, we'll see what happens there. I expect them to stay active on the offensive line here in the next few weeks, do their due diligence on the remaining targets. And, if it comes down to it, it's not their first choice, but I think they're willing to wait till the spring and the April transfer window to try and address offensive line again, I think the interior, if they can add a veteran, they'd like to, but I also think for the most part, they're comfortable with the depth there. You like, Justin Evans as a guard or a center. You like Sam Sledge. You like Houston Keanu Torres and Preston Tuamu. You like Gibson Pyle, once he's recovered and fully healthy. Grant Briggs can play inside or out. Right now, just based on where he's at in his development, it might be easier for him to start on the inside of the line. But he's a high upside player with a really, really high ceiling. Is he a guy that contends for a guard spot this offseason? We'll see. I'm very interested to see what happens on the offensive line here in the next few weeks and months, because again, if they're not able to address it through the transfer portal, they'll have to get creative in going into the 2025 season to keep Dylan Raiola protected, because that's obviously priority number one. You've gotten him weapons. You've surrounded him with a talented running back in Evan Johnson. You got him offensive, you got him pass catchers. You have your tight end room. You've got some depth there and some good blockers there. You have a play caller, Dana Holgerson. And you have veterans on the line. You have experience and talent on the line, but they're not proven. And that's the biggest thing right now, is they're not proven, and they're not, they could be better. And, if you're looking at one area of the roster that I think could afford to improve before the 2025 season, it's the offensive line. And so that's the biggest opportunity to improve at this point. That's the biggest need for Nebraska at this point. So we'll see how they address it here in the next few weeks, next few months, potentially going into April. And switching gears real quick before we get out of here, I did want to touch on the 2026 cycle and beyond. Real quick programming note, we'll be in San Antonio here at the end of the week for the All-American Bowl. Really excited to get out there. Nebraska commits Cortez Mills and Christian Jones will be playing. A few 2026 Nebraska targets will be participating as well, and we'll have some 2026, 2027, and 2028 targets competing in the All-American Combine on Friday. So excited to get down there and take all that in. One of my favorite events every year, that combine. Every year we find talent there. So I'm really excited to be down there. And so stay tuned for all of our coverage from there. I'm sure I'll have a video too potentially from down there. So stay tuned for all of that and all of our content over at Inside Nebraska. And like I said, before we get out of here, did want to touch on a couple things in 2026. Nebraska's making some new offers. You're starting to see those trickle out as the coaches hit the road starting Monday, January 6th. Jamar Mosley's already down in Houston, making some new offers, hitting some schools. I expect him to visit a few programs in Texas, potentially get up to Oklahoma and Kansas City as well, his old stomping grounds. I'm expecting Nebraska to stay very active in Missouri because they have a ton of 26 targets out there. Keenan Harris, four-star linebacker out of St. Louis University High, is already expecting Nebraska on campus this week. Jacob Eberhardt, another one from Kirkwood, Missouri. He is expecting Nebraska's coaching staff on campus this week. Zephan Walker out of Ray-Pec in Missouri is probably, hoping to get Nebraska staff on campus this week as well. So I think you're going to see them active in Missouri. We're already seeing Addison Williams, new defensive backs coach, back in his old stomping grounds of Florida, making some new offers out there. Like I said, kind of when these hires were happening, it kind of feels like Nebraska's getting back to their Florida roots, trying to get that Florida pipeline up and running again after, somewhat of a down year in the cycle or a down year, just in recruiting Florida. But with some of the relationships on staff, with some of the performances we've seen from Florida natives on the roster, all of that goes a long way. I know I've said this a few times, but it means a lot to people in South Florida that Ja'Cory Barney's getting the run that he is at Nebraska. It means a lot to people down there that Willis McGahee is having to play. He is playing the way he is down there. Amari Sanders, same thing. Larry Tarver, all those guys having success in Nebraska goes a long way down in South Florida. So Nebraska is going to continue to continue to recruit the state of Florida. And with Addison Williams on staff, with Philip Simpson on staff, John Butler has some relationships down there as well. Florida is going to stay, very much a key spot for Nebraska. It's going to stay a place where Nebraska is going to continue to recruit, where they're going to continue to find wide receivers and defensive backs and linebackers. And so, we mentioned last week over on the Insiders board, Jordan Campbell is a Miami commit out of Carroll City High School. Four-star linebacker, one of the best linebackers in the 2026 class. He's planning a handful of official visits. Nebraska's going to get one of those. He's committed to Miami. He's been committed to Miami since 2023. That doesn't matter. Nebraska's been chipping away. Oregon's going to get him on campus for an official visit. Nebraska's going to get him on campus for an official visit. He's a guy that, is very excited by the opportunities he has, but just hasn't been able to get out to a couple other places beyond his hometown of Florida or hometown of Miami. So, he's a guy that, if Nebraska can get him on campus, anything can happen. They have got really good relationships there. Rob Dvoracek's done a really good job there. I expect Addison Williams to contribute a little bit as well now. John Butler, so on and so forth. So we'll have more coverage here on some 2026 developments here in the next few weeks as these coaches hit the road, some new offers going out. So stay tuned to the Inside Nebraska Insiders board is at Nebraska.com. Our Twitter channels, I'm at Tim Verghese as always. So stay tuned for all of that here in the next few weeks. We appreciate y'all tuning in. And I do apologize for rambling here at the end, but appreciate y'all again for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.